Hello and welcome to Oak Road Hatter, where there's no Jamie Castle this week, as he's decided to avoid yesterday's game by going on a nice holiday, and he's probably right to do so. But we are still, as always, joined by Adam Driscoll. How are you doing, Adam?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, mate. I'm probably better than a lot of people that spent all of Saturday going to Sheffield, watching the game, and going home. Yeah, I think I've managed to kind of switch off a little bit from the inevitable yesterday, and yeah, my weekend's going pretty well, all things considered.
And we're also joined by Lewis Jones. How are you doing, Lewis?
Yeah, all good, thank you, mate. Nice to be back.
Yeah, and as we've alluded to, we are going to be talking yesterday's what was a pretty shocking performance and 2-0 defeat away to Sheffield United. But before that, don't forget to give us a follow on social media. That's at Oak Road Hatter on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. And rate us 5 stars on your audio listening platform. We really appreciate the support, and it helps us to create the best content for you. But we're going to get straight into things, and we are going to talk about that terrible. Well, the result isn't actually that bad, but the performance was shocking. For those of you that are watching this and don't know the score, I'm not sure how you would have found this, but we did lose 2-0 to Sheffield United, thanks to a brace from Jesser Raksaki. I've probably butchered that name. Apologies. I don't think he'll be listening. But yeah, it was as I mentioned, a really just a poor performance, an uninspiring performance, and it was a game that had the added pressure of leading into the international break and the derby in the next match. So, yeah, Lewis, I'll come straight to you, and we can talk about. We'll talk about that first goal really, because it was a mix-up from McGuinness and Walters, and then just terrible defending.
It's a bundle of errors, really. It should have been cleared about 3 or 4 times. There was so many chances to just get rid of it. To keep him on the edge of the box, where he's given all the time in the world just to whether he wants to head it, whether he wants to kick it like he did. It was just baffling defending, but it kind of summed up our defending from the whole season, really. Players just seem to have no idea where they're meant to be, who they're meant to be with, and what they're meant to do. It seems to be the basics that just can't be done right at the moment.
Yeah, and I felt bad for Walters in a way. He's a young defender. He's a right back that was shoehorned into left back again for some reason. Even though we'll come on to the players played out of position, because it's pretty bizarre some of the positions that players took up throughout the game. But yeah, Adam Walters playing at left back against Raksaki, who ironically we were linked with in the summer and were beaten to by Sheffield United. Not that I know how much actual interest there was from us. Yeah, he struggled to deal with him all game, really. But that goal in particular was poor from everyone involved.
Yeah, really poor. I've seen the highlights back, and even from when that kind of clip starts, that's the first kind of like battle. And Lewis is right. There's sort of, I think I counted 4 opportunities for us to defend better. 3 of them being, winning a second ball, because there was a bit of sort of like head tennis going on. So there's 3 or 4 opportunities to get rid and just get rid of that danger, and we've failed on all of them. Very ironic that it's Raksaki. The 1st of July was when we were first linked with him, and we were the first club really from Alan Nixon that were linked with him. It was a double loan deal potentially for him and David Ozo. So yeah, another player that we missed out on in the summer, and it was almost written in the stars that he would have a huge impact on the game against us.
Yeah, he's one of a number of players we were linked with in the summer and didn't materialise. And that is an issue we've discussed on previous podcasts. If you haven't listened to that, go back and find our transfer window roundup, where we spoke in detail about some of the opinions we have of the window. But yeah, as I mentioned, Walters was playing out of position. He was in at left back. We had Reece Burke at right back, in a back four that also had McGuinness and Mengi in. And then ahead of them, from what we worked out at the game, we had a midfield of Nakamba and Kraus, with Moses on the left, Alfie on the right, and then Clark either alongside or just behind Adebayo, and it just nothing seemed to work throughout the game. And that first goal really showed that, because McGuinness was nowhere near the first ball that he should have been easily winning in the air. The second ball dropped to Raksaki, who beat Walters with ease, and that was a player who was he was playing on the wrong side, so he was wrong-footed, and all Raksaki had to do was cut into the box and just fire across goal, and it was an easy 1-0, and that was pretty much how the day went. Players being caught on the wrong foot or just slightly behind the play, and it was pretty disastrous. So, yeah, we'll talk about that second goal as well. So, another Raksaki goal beat Walters again. At this time, it managed to go through Kaminski's legs, which was pretty unlucky for Kaminski, because he did have a relatively good game. He made some good stops and actually kept us in the game, Lewis.
Yeah, I think Kaminski comes out of the game, as per usual, with a lot of credit. He kept that scoreline a lot lower than what it probably should have been. And regarding Walters at left back, for me, I don't think it's a big deal. I think if you can play right back, you should be able to play left back, especially with someone like Raksaki, who's going to be cutting inside on his left foot 9 times out of 10. As someone who's right-footed, you're generally going to tackle with your right foot. So if he's coming inside, that shouldn't really be an issue. Defending a winger is defending a winger. Yes, he's young, but Raksaki isn't exactly an experienced pro. So the shape was absolutely baffling. And I think that's also what led into the confusion about where players are meant to be, who's covering what space, who's in what half area. And because of all them issues, that just led to the absolute cluster of a mess that was the second goal. It was sitting off of them, which is fine if you've got a strong, sturdy shape, but we don't. It was sitting off of them, a simple pass into Raksaki. He skins Walters. Maybe he gets a little bit lucky with the finish, but he hit the target, and sometimes they go in like they did.
Just on Lewis's point about Walters, I'm not sure I necessarily agree that if you can play right back, you should be able to play left back, because if you're right-footed, you're so much more comfortable really at right back. There's not many right-footed players that you would say are preferred on the left side. I understand the roles are similar, but you talk about the shape of a player and what they're looking out for. It's all sort of reversed, isn't it, in a sense? So, I mean, why the hell we put Walters in an unfamiliar position against a young lad like Raksaki, who's got bags of talent, on his preferred side? It's just it's madness as well. And I was following the game a little bit on Twitter, and a lot of the themes of responses to club tweets and Luton news tweets were saying, why have we got at least 4 players playing out of position? And yeah, it's the first sign of madness, really, isn't it? When you're so unsure of what you're actually doing that you're playing multiple players out of position.
I mean, I think the first sign of madness is, as we've mentioned before, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which we are also doing. So
Yes,
at least we're consistent on that. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was frustrating within the ground itself. It was like quite audible frustration with players playing out of position. We had Moses on the left, who I don't know if I mentioned earlier, who throughout his career really he's played on the right or in the middle, and he looked pretty stuck for ideas playing on that left side. He wanted to cut in to use his right foot, but was getting easily dealt with by Gilchrist was up against him. And he's a very inexperienced defender, but he had an easy day. We'll come on to some of the other players later, but yeah, as I mentioned there, I mean, it was 2-0, and it could have quite easily been more for Sheffield United, Lewis. They absolutely dominated the game, and I don't think they really got out of second gear throughout it.
No, they didn't. It was as comfortable a win as it was ever going to be. I think even Chris Wilder thought it was going to be an easy day at the office because he rested Burrows and Hamer, who would normally start week in, week out. But I don't blame him, in all honesty. I'd look at us at the moment and go, I'll give him a rest. It's an easy day at the office for us. Shoehorning players in to places they shouldn't be playing, realistically. I think, as you mentioned, Moses, Doughty, Walters, even Burt to an extent isn't exactly a right back. He can play there, but not his natural position. It should have been 4, realistic. If I'm being fair, it probably should have been 3 or 4. And yeah, that's lucky that it wasn't. I think if it was that, it would have been completely demoralising. Luckily, it wasn't. And realistically, there was only one team in that game. I watched the highlights again just before this to remind myself. It was the one Jacob Brown header, I think about 87 minutes in or something like that. And that was our highlight. Possibly the Mengi one in the first half as well, where he hits it into side netting. It was a dismal display.
Yeah, from inside the ground, the Mengi one, which obviously, if you haven't been to Bramall Lane, the away end is quite low. It was the opposite end to where the Mengi effort was, and we couldn't really see what was going on from that anyway. So that was in the highlights. It was probably actually our best chance aside from Jacob Brown, and it's also the only chance I can really remember. But in every position on the pitch, we were second best. We were so late to the loose balls, which was really baffling to see Nakamba getting out battled for loose balls, particularly by someone. I mean, Ollie Arblaster is clearly a very talented young player, but he had a very easy day. And it was him that was putting the deliveries into the box for set pieces, where at times we looked like we were flapping a bit as well. Yeah, it was just all round very easy for Sheffield United. And as you mentioned, Lewis, they didn't even need to go to Hamer, who is quite comfortably their best player. But the players they had on the pitch, from back to front, were very, very solid and impressive, if anything, just especially comparatively to what we had on offer. And yeah, we've mentioned the players out of position, so I'll run through them again. At right back, we had Reece Burke, who's obviously a centre back, can play right back, but he's probably not at his best there. Left back, we had Roel Walters, who's a right back and very inexperienced anyway, so you probably want him on his better side, even though he did fairly well against Oxford when he came on at left back. Victor Moses was on left wing. Alfie Doughty was at right wing, I believe, and Jordan Clark was sort of everywhere and nowhere. And I've been thinking about it today, just why we were doing that. And the only thing I can think of why we had, well, Alfie mainly playing at right wing is because the last time we played there, he cut inside and finished a chance from that side. I think the reason Edwards is trying to deploy him in the wing is because he's at the moment, our only outlet, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going through that. I think the Burke at right back, I'm not too fussed about because he can do it and he does like to get up the line. But the other ones are mind blowing. My favourite tweet from yesterday was someone who said, "If you throw enough shit at a wall, something will stick," or something to that effect. And that just sums it up for me. Yeah, far too many players that are playing out of position, and it's just hopeful, isn't it? I mean, Clark did all right against Oxford in the first 30 minutes, and obviously took his goal well. Other than that, he's been shocking. And this, I think his mum or his wife was on Twitter or something, trying to defend him, which fine. And I'm not just digging him out, but he's been one of a number of players that have just been really poor. So to keep him floating around different positions is another sign of the madness. Yeah, it's just too much. Too much fiddling around, too much trial and error, because it literally is resulting in error, isn't it? Really, at the moment as well.
Yeah, and as Adam mentioned about Clark there, it was kind of, I don't know what it was. I know it was more like a 9.5. It wasn't a 9. It wasn't a 10. It was just, I don't know. It was baffling to see, quite simply. But you've got Nelson and Woodrow. You can have your opinions about either as much as you want, but that's their natural position. They're normally playing in that 10 role or that 9. Why is Jordan Clark, who's predominantly been a centre midfielder or a right winger for us, playing in what legitimately was a striker role, from what I could tell from what I was watching? It was just, as Adam said, throwing shit at a wall and sooner or later hoping something will stick, because it seems like absolute guesswork at the moment. I touched on it a few weeks ago when I was last on the pod, and I said it's square pegs and round holes, but to a lesser extent of what it was last year. And it was this again. Moses, Doughty, Walters, Clark. We've got players that can play in these positions, but for some reason he opts to just go with these players who are consistently out of form, especially even Adebayo to an extent. He's a focal point, and Kiefer Moore schooled him yesterday on how to be a big number 9. Hold your defender off, bully him off, take it down, get your team up the pitch. Adebayo, I love him, but I didn't do that once yesterday. Suter absolutely bullied him. And then Keith Moore at the other end bullied our centre halves.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to come on to, because our only out ball really from goal kicks was a hopeful ball out to the right to Reece Burke, who was for some reason being deployed at the right wing. And that's not just an opinion, that is what Edwards has said in his post-match interview. He said our out ball was to find Reece Burke on that high right position. If that's our best attacking threat, is to find a centre-back playing out of position and trying to get the ball to him, what are we doing, really? I just think it's kind of baffling. And in the car home yesterday from the game, this was probably about halfway on the drive when we found the post-match interview, because it was just nowhere to be seen, really. We did see this, and there was quite an audible conversation in our car on the way back between the four of us, just about that option with Reece Burke as our outball. And I really like Burke, but he's not an attacker, and everyone knows that. He's at his best in that right side of the back three, and it was pretty unfair on him to have him as the outball. That's my opinion on that. But as you mentioned there, Lewis, Adebayo was absolutely dominated by Sutar. He was also dominated by Ahmed Hodzic, who ironically showed how to attack as a centre-back as well. I think it was probably, I wouldn't even say it was his worst game. I just think Eli was completely invisible throughout the game. I don't know what you thought from while you were watching it, Lewis.
Yeah, he looks isolated, and that's why I have sympathy for him. He needs like a Jacob Brown alongside him, and he's saying, Edwards, about this Burke outball. Jacob Brown has got the leap of a gazelle. If you hit him long, he'll probably win it, or he'll give it a good go, and then you've got Adebayo alongside him. I understand he's just come back from injury, so it's difficult, but you've got to find a different way to play. You can't just put, all right, Berkey, can you go forward for us, try and win it? He's not exactly aerially dominant either. He's decent in the air, Burke, but he's even McGuinness is a lot better in the air. He's a proper centre half, but it's just hope, and it's a bit sad to see, if I'm honest.
The just to come in there, the Luton News Twitter were confirming what you guys are saying about the Burke outball, and they were basically just tweeting saying, for some reason Burke's finding himself as our target forward, then we're not winning the second ball off of it, and then he's having to run back and defend because he's playing right back. It's just like, I had to read it 2 or 3 times to make sure I was actually reading the right names. It's absolutely mental.
Yeah, it was baffling at times from inside the ground, and there was audible frustration, which we will come on to because that's done its rounds pretty well. Thanks to the Second Tier podcast, who also managed to feature me in the video that they've posted. But yeah, it was, as you mentioned, Lewis, Eli was completely isolated up there when we had attackers on the bench. But I just wanted to come back to Alfie, because he was probably our best player from the players that started. I mean, it didn't take much, but he was the player showing some intent to get forward and try and sort of do something. Even late on in the game, he was still trying. And then at one point, he cut into the byline and tried to get a ball across. It didn't go for him. And he showed real visible frustration. He kicked an advertising hoarding right in front of us and almost knocked the photographer off his stool just behind it, which was probably the highlight of the game, to be honest. But he looks like a really frustrated figure out there, because he is being made to play slightly out of position, and he doesn't seem to be able to do what he's best at when he's there, which is get out wide and put a ball into the box, which he was doing well to beat. It was McCallum he was playing against, but then because he's a fullback, or he's a wing back, so he's very dominant on one foot. He needed to cut back inside onto his left foot, and it was immediately killing the attack. So it just meant we had so little going forward at all. And yeah, as you mentioned there, Adam, it was quite baffling to see Reece Burke getting up there and then losing the second ball, which is what you'd expect Nakamba to be on. And even he was nowhere near what his usual ability was. He was getting beaten to the ball by Callum O'Hare, who was a real luxury player.
Yeah, well, I mean, if Nakamba's getting out Nakamba'd, then you've got serious problems. And I know they're not really training him that much so they can play him in games. we have more problems, don't we, than just Nakamba having a bad game or whatever. We can't be relying on one player alone to actually get on the ball and get us going. I think even we played games. The minutes he played against Oxford, there was a lot of times where he was picking up that loose ball, and nothing was going on in front of him. So he's only as good as the movement and the intent that's ahead of him. But there will be games where he just doesn't really have a sniff because there are players that are, unfortunately for Sheffield United, you mentioned Ollie Arblaster. They are young players that are as good as him. So it's a tough one. And I know we're not pinning anything on the Gamba. It's the fact that we can't rely on him to be doing everything for us really.
Yeah, and Lewis, we mentioned Eli had a bad day out. We mentioned Clark had a bad day out. I think the one player that really had a bad day as well was McGuinness. He's a big physical defender, and as you mentioned before, he got absolutely dominated by Kiefer Moore.
Yeah, I've mentioned it previously as well. I think he's been okay, McGuinness, before this, without being spectacular. And yesterday, quite simply, he looked well out of his depth, which is bizarre for a player that's played quite a few games at the championship level. He just looked utterly baffled. He was throwing his body, but he was throwing his body nowhere. He was just throwing his body hopelessly, like with the Vinny Souza shot. He hit the post, but he's too far. The distance was so wrong that Souza still had time to get a shot off. It was a very, very tough day for him. I don't think he helped himself by his Instagram post saying that we'll regroup, rebuild, etc., and then turning off the comments. And he's going away on international duty, so it's going to be interesting to see what he's doing with Luton while he's away with Ireland. But yeah, I think Mengi, to be fair to him, still had a decent game, although his centre half partner didn't. And yeah, I want him to do well, but it's tough at the moment. It's tough.
And yeah, you mentioned there he's off with Ireland, so no offence, Ireland fans, but he's not exactly going to be playing for a team that are competent defensively again while he's away. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. You might disagree as an Ireland fan, but from what I've heard from Ireland fans I've heard from previously, they also agree that they cannot defend. Yeah, you mentioned Mengi there. He's one of a couple of players who performed adequately, I would say. I've mentioned Alfie already. Kaminsky as well, despite the second goal. And I mean, it's difficult to think of anyone else, really. I am struggling here. Our best players were probably the players that came off the bench, really. And we'll be talking about those subs after this break. Welcome back to Oak Road Hatter, where I'm still joined by Adam and Lewis. And as I mentioned before the break, we're now going to talk a bit about the subs, who, to be fair to them, showed some positive signs compared to what we'd seen for the first 60 minutes. So just to run you through the subs that were made, on 61 minutes, Woodrow and Brown were brought on. And on 68 minutes, Baptiste and Taylor were brought on, which, to be fair to Taylor, it's probably the longest he's gone. But even so, it was not much to do, really. But yeah, I wanted to discuss in particular Woodrow and Brown, because they did show some positive signs when they came on. It changed the shape completely. It looked like a more conventional, I think, 4-4-2. I still don't really know. But yeah, Brown went out wide and Woodrow went sort of alongside Eli, maybe just slightly behind. And in fairness to Cauley Woodrow, I would say he was probably our best player yesterday, Lewis.
Yeah, he was impressive. Neat and tidy, created a few little things. I think the first thing he did was lose the ball, ironically, when Doughty played it into him. And I thought, oh no, please have a good game, Cauley. And after that, he did, to be fair to him. He's neat and tidy, played it up well. I think it helped that he was actually playing a bit further forward. He was basically playing that Clark role, which, like I mentioned earlier in the pod, he could have played there from the start. opted against it, and he did well. Brown was impressive as per. I love the bloke. Whenever he plays, he always gives 100%. He's physical, he's quick. He just causes mayhem. And it was nice to see something a bit different up front in Woodrow and Brown. It's not a pairing that you would automatically go to, obviously, because we've got Adebayo and we've got Carlton. And then obviously Taylor, but I don't know what's gone on there. Clearly there's some sort of issue, because I can't see how a player who was a top scorer at 2 clubs last year can't manage to get on for us until the 68th minute, which is a different story. The fact that we were already 2-0 down by that point, and I think it's about 7 minutes apart, Brown and Woodrow come on, and then Baptiste and Taylor come on. Why not bring more than one go? That was bizarre to me as well, because we at that point we was well out of the game anyway. But no, I think, to be fair to them, all the subs come out of it with a bit more credit than their counterparts that started.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, Woodrow did well. He actually did play well, to be fair to him. He was looking to create things, which was more than anyone else had done throughout the game, and he was finding himself sort of between the defence and the midfield for Sheffield United in space at times, and he was actually like getting the ball around and opening chances for players, but we just weren't creating enough really, and didn't really have the runners. Brown was playing really wide and was actually doing well to try and beat his man, which again was more than we've seen throughout the game, and that actually lifted a couple of other players as well. Moses in particular, he was moved onto the right when Brown came on, and he looked to try and beat his man as well. He was being more direct, was being more of the Victor Moses that we expected. You've touched on it there, but Taylor and Baptiste came on, and I was really pleased to see Baptiste come on. Not because he did anything in particular, just we needed him back. He's been probably one of our better performers in the opening 4 games. He's shown some real positive signs of being a real box-to-box midfielder. It's just been unfortunate that those games have been pretty shit, and he's been limited in what he can actually do, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, early days from what we've seen from Baptiste, I do like him. I said a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, I feel like there's a lot more to come from him as well. It doesn't, it makes you think, if he's fit and if he stays fit, what does that midfield look like? Because to me, you have to play Kraus. I appreciate you might not have had a great game yesterday by all accounts, but I think he showed against Oxford the impact that he has with the high press, and he obviously got an assist and a goal. So I think you have to play Kraus. I think you have to play Nakamba, because they complement each other. In albeit they're defensive minded, but they are sort of a 6 and an 8, and they're a little bit different to each other. And then I think you probably have to play Baptiste, because he's a little bit more of that kind of like progressive powerhouse in a sense. So yeah, I mean, I do like Baptiste. I think if we can keep him fit and you can bring him into that midfield, that would be the way that I would go with it personally, looking kind of like longer term. I don't know what you guys think on that kind of midfield, what that looks like.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the midfield, and I had a look at different combinations, and I'm actually of the same opinion. I think we should have a 3 in midfield, because it does make us significantly more compact, and we've looked so open in midfield with it being a 2. I'm surprised a 2 with Clark sort of floating out of possession. We look completely open, and we're easy to cut through, almost effortless to cut through, and that's with Nakamba in there, who is a very good ball-winning midfielder, but we're getting completely caught. So I think we need a midfield 3 of Nakamba, Kraus, and Baptiste. I don't know about you, Lewis, but I think that's probably a similar opinion.
Yeah, I think there's been plenty of times this season already where it's been played around by a 4-2-3-1, and that 3 in the middle just doing R2, which is a similar story yesterday. Clark was kind of in that, like I said, 9.5, where he wasn't quite in the midfield and he wasn't quite a striker. So I personally have a Baptiste, because he can play number 8. It's a bit of a weird one, because he kind of started off as a number 6 for us earlier in the season. But I'd say he was predominantly more of an 8 or 10 at his time at Oxford and at his time at Brentford. So he can definitely play there. But even to an extent, Victor Moses, Edward said himself that he could play winger or number 10. And so far, he's looked nowhere near that number 10 spot. So it's a bit of an interesting one that Edwards mentioned it. he seems very reluctant to play a number 10. But for me, it's Baptiste, or I'd like to see Moses in there, interestingly, Nelson, Clark. But Nakamba and Kraus, for me, they have to be the main two. The thing we've missed this year for me is a strong spine. We don't really have a spine. Who is our back three? Who is if we're staying with back three, who is our main two midfielders? Who are our front two? It's been so much chop and change. There's been no real spine there. Edwardson needs to look at it and go, look, these are my players playing week in, week out, whether they're in form, out of form. But it's a bit of a mystery, and let's hope we can finally sort that out.
You mentioned the spine of the team there quite interestingly, and if we go back to the Plymouth game and you think about that game, you have Adebayo's playing up front basically by himself, and we know he's out of form. Then you've got a midfield where I think we had Kraus and Clark, and we spoke about how poor in particular Clark was in that game. So your spine's broken straight away because you've got no one at the top of it that's impacting the game. You've got half of your midfield too that are not impacting the game, and then you've got the centre half situation where you're probably playing Mengi out of position. McGuinness is still adapting a little bit and looks okay, but nothing more than okay in my opinion. And I think back to the successful Luton teams of the past, and I even go back to as far as 20 years ago, 2004, 2005, when we won League One, and you had Chris Coyne, Kevin Nichols, and Steve Howard, and players that would just they're very good at what they do, but a proper spine of a team. And we're currently nowhere near having that spine and the foundations to use the luxury players around them, the likes of Chong and what I think Moses can be or will be. We don't have any foundations to a team at the moment that lets you use those luxury players, and I think that's really why we're getting massively found out across all areas of the pitch, really.
Yeah, the spine is something that's been an issue all season. We're getting opened up quite easily down the middle, and I'd love to know, and we'd love to know your thoughts if you're listening to this about what you think that should be in midfield in particular. So, if you comment on this and let us know who you'd play in midfield and how sort of what formation you'd have across there, or if you're listening to the audio version, get in touch with us at Oak Road Hatter on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook as well, and let us know what you think our spine in midfield should be. I just wanted to touch now on something that, as I mentioned, has done the rounds a lot, and that is the full-time reaction to the match and directed towards Edwards in particular. Because, I mean, late on in the game, probably from about 85 minutes onwards, there were pretty loud chants of Edwards sort it out coming from the Luton end. And, I mean, it wasn't just a couple of people as well. It was quite large sections of the Luton end singing it. And then at full time, it was not so much booing, there was a lot of people really just generally pissed off that had left already, or it was that Edwards sorted it out, directed at him, and he came over and did his usual clapping of the fans, and then put his hands up in apology. And at that point, I felt bad, to be honest. I felt really bad for him, not because he's doing a good job and it's undeserved, but because I think he just looked like he had no real plan during the game, Lewis.
Yeah, it's quite sad because he is, and as we've seen it, at his best, he's a top manager. But it's kind of going back to his Watford days where there's no plan B and he doesn't really know what to do. He's just a bit lost. And when you've got a manager that's lost, doesn't really know what to do, you've got players like Reece Burke coming out saying, look, we just need to go back to basics. It's not working with a style of football. You've got your own players coming out basically saying, what the manager's telling us to do isn't working. We don't like it. That's not a good sign. Doughty, whether that was aimed at the manager or just in general being massively frustrated, it's not good. And sometimes you just need that change. Like we've got a losing mentality from the Premier League, but that's been carried into this season, and it's looked like it as well. Sometimes you just need that fresh air of a new manager coming in, changing a few things, just lifting the mood in general. It's tough for Edwards, and it's not if it's abuse as such, because saying Edwards sort it out, it's not like Edwards get out, Edwards out, sack Edwards, but it's not exactly what he wants to be hearing at the end of the game. I don't think the club have helped themselves by removing his post-match interview. I think it's hiding away from the trouble rather than facing it head on, which coming into an international break, you kind of want the manager to say, look, we have 2 weeks, we're going to sort this out, big derby game ahead, everyone, we're gonna do this, we're gonna get through it, let's go. A bit of positivity would be nice.
Yeah, it was very negative at full time, and it was one of the more unpleasant ends of a stadium I've been in, especially recently. Obviously, when Graham Jones was there and when he was eventually removed of his job, it was during that COVID period, so there weren't fans in the ground. So I'm sure that would have been much worse if there was than what we're hearing now. But it is starting to sort of swing a bit, and it's particularly bad when the fans that are travelling to the away games are the ones that are getting audibly frustrated, because they are the ones that are sticking by and putting a lot of money into going away from home as well. Lewis, you mentioned there the next game, and it is Watford at home, and the pressure that is now maybe not internally from the board, but I don't know what the relationship is and what the attitude is towards Edward internally. None of us know, but from the outside and with the fan base, it's almost a must-win derby now, Adam.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, it's ironic that he's under so much pressure, and the next team to come to town is Watford. And when I think back to the time a couple of years ago when we went to Vicarage Road, didn't we? And we were the ones in form, and they were the ones that were all over the place. And yeah, how times change. It's been flipped on its head. I don't think the board are going to do anything anytime soon. I mean, it's going to get extremely toxic if we lose to Watford. And I can't sit here now and say I'm confident we're going to get anything. But I don't think a point's good enough. Like, what does that do? It just kicks the can down the road, doesn't it? And we'll pick up the poor performance again at some point. Because let's not forget, we've not played well in one game this season yet. You know, and that is a problem in itself, regardless of the 2 wins that we've had. Yeah, I don't think the board are going to take action. I think that's indicated heavily by the fact that they gave him a 4-year contract in the summer. So, do we really see them spending probably what will be millions to sack him and then pay money to get someone else in? I just don't think they're going to do it. My personal opinion, as I've said on Twitter at the moment, is that I think someone else can get a heck of a lot more out of this group of players, because regardless of a poor window, we still have a very good squad, right? We still have the primarily a defence that we built our foundations of success on in that championship season. Yet we've already conceded what, I don't know, 15, maybe more than that goals. I'm not sure what it is now. It might be more than that. So there's a lot more to be got out of these players, and it does beg the question: how long do you let this go on? In the long term, it reminds me a lot of when John Still was coming to the end. I think we'd lost 7 or 8 games in a row, something like that, and that got him sacked. And it's a similar vibe, because we love John Still, without a doubt, but it was the right time for us to move on from him. You can also make references to Harford after we lost to Stevenage. Everyone loves Mick, but it was the right time for him to go. I love Rob Edwards, but for me, it's probably the right time for us to make a change. Now, there's a lot of divided opinions on social media, and you know what Luton Twitter gets like. It gets a bit tense. It gets a bit unnecessary, let's say. And I do respect people's opinions. We've got the old guard that say, well, you weren't there during Lenny Lawrence, but why do we have to measure against previous things? We need to take the situation as it is now on its merits, and it's clearly not working. So yeah, as I say, I don't think they're gonna action anything. But for me, now would be the good time to do it with this break. Um, yeah, 2 week break as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the argument that is made by it's mainly an older section of fans who say, for example, you weren't there during Lenny Lawrence. No, a lot of us weren't born during Lenny Lawrence. I, for one, wasn't born. Lewis, probably, I don't think you were either.
no, I was
No,
not.
I was. I'm afraid to admit. Yeah.
but yeah, as you mentioned there, it shouldn't be you weren't there for this. It's what's happening right now, and I don't know if I really still don't know what to think in terms of making a change or not. As you said, I love Edwards as well, and I really want it to turn for him because I want him to do well, and I want him to. Well, I just want him to be a happy Rob Edwards again because at the moment it's really quite sad listening to him talk and seeing the look on his face. Because I don't know if you've not seen the post match interview, he looks like visibly upset, and he did at full time as well, like really visibly upset. And for a manager that last season and before that as well was like probably I mean, I can't think of any other people are as loved or were as loved as Edwards was. Not just by our fan base as well, from external. It's just from generally the football world, and he just is not a happy man at the moment, Lewis.
No, he doesn't. And I've used the word sad a few times now, and it is because everyone loves seeing these upbeat. Because I used to love bloody NJ's. I love NJ, but his post-match conferences at times, Jesus Christ. Sometimes I dismiss them because he does love a moan, which we all do. But Edwards, I'd always listen, always, every single time I'd listen because he's always upbeat. He'd address the issue straight away and said, "Oh, we didn't do this well enough today." But now it's a bit like, like the Oxford one the other day. They had a good 25-minute period, either in the middle of the game. I think he's trying to make himself feel better a little bit, which he does need. But it goes back to the atmosphere. How can someone who is clearly so low and struggling lift other players? How can he lift the players when he himself is in what appears to be a low morale? What's going to change that apart from a new manager? Is what I don't know. I simply don't know what we can do. And I don't think it's helping himself. I think he said his biggest weakness and biggest strength time is being a bit empathetic. And I think that's what's got him in a situation. He's just he's just overthinking. He's been empathetic with players, playing them when they realistically probably shouldn't be. Look at Clark, look at Adebayo. And now he just seems lost. And I don't want it to get bad of him because he deserves so much credit. I know he said he just about tweaked NJ's system a few times, but he did more than that. In the Premier League, we did a lot better showing than what I think any of us expected. And a bit further afield, it's kind of a David Moyes situation where he did so well at West Ham, and it was kind of he won them I think it was the Conference League, wasn't it? And it started to turn a little bit, and then he's like, "Yeah, you know what? I know it's towards the back end of the season, but he went, it's time to call it because it's going to get sour." I don't think any Luton fan wants that with him. We just want to see the happy, upbeat Rob Edwards, and whether that's with us or if he moves on, it would just be good to see him back to that state.
Lewis, you mentioned Jones. I see a lot of similarities in Edwards and Jones in terms of how led by emotion they are. Now, like Nathan with his old chest pumping and stuff, and then you mentioned some of those press conferences where we lost, and he says, "I feel physically sick." But let's be honest, most games under Jones, we won. So players fed off of that emotion and that energy and that passion. I think Edwards has the same level of emotion, but when you're not winning games, it's very, very hard for someone like him to hide that emotion. And when you're leading this group and you're the ones that are meant to be picking them off the floor, if your emotional control isn't there, how do you do that? Um, and that's the challenge I think he has. And every press conference becomes more and more depressing. It becomes more and more like he seems to not be able to identify anymore where we're going wrong, and it's just like a summary of, well, we didn't do this, that, and the other. And I think that's a massive problem that we have in terms of that repeat every single week with the. He almost looks depressed and sounds depressed, which is horrible, absolutely horrible. And that's something else we have to consider as well. Like at some point, they might not want to do it, but do the club need to take this decision for his welfare as well? Because a manager's not necessarily going to walk away from a multi-million-pound contract, but the bloke does look depressed at times, and it's horrible to see it. And I don't really want to see it too much longer. Whether it's having to make a decision or not, it's just not really nice to watch every week.
And yeah, Adam, you mentioned there that it will probably be rubbing off on the players. I think there's no doubt that with Edwards, it will be rubbing off on the players, or they'll be noticing it quite clearly, because I think when players have spoken about him before, they've said how much they love him and how much of almost a father figure he is to them. And I mean, if you saw someone in your house constantly down like that, or someone that you're really close to constantly down like that, it would undoubtedly rub off on you. So you can imagine how sad the atmosphere is in the dressing room after games at times. I just imagine it's really, really low. And I think the one thing we can say, when you've got someone like Pelly in there, hopefully it lifts it, because he is someone who tries to find the positives in it. And I think we really need that at the moment, not necessarily on the pitch, but off the pitch. I think something needs to be done to lift the spirits and put a smile back on Edward's face and everyone else's face associated with the club. And I think, just to look ahead, I think a win over Watford at home could be the thing that really flips it for the emotional side of things, Lewis.
Yeah, definitely. I think, despite the poor start, I think you should win that game. Not the fans are immediately like that back on side, but they'll be a lot more receptive if you beat Watford at home. That's just the way it is in reality. If you beat Watford at home, win the derby day, all the euphoria that comes with that, there'll be the massive release of emotion. And on the flip side, if you lose that, that's probably going to be the lowest dressing room he's ever been in. Probably lower than when we got relegated from the Premier League, because the fans will be angry or distraught. Then that'll rub off on the players. But if he wins it, you never know. That could genuinely change around everything. I would not be surprised if it did, because then we got Sunderland. Look forward to that. Remind them these who we beat in the playoffs. We're back under the lights again. Remember what happened last time. A derby win can properly lift things. And I genuinely hope for Rob and both the players that we can win that, lift everyone, lift everything, and then get on with the season.
I think on the derby as well. I'll take a win however it comes. Right, it's a game that none of us want to lose at all, from either side. We got a lot of Watford mates between us, and they're into it just as much as we are. But I think a good performance has to come with it, because it's all well and good winning the derby, and that's fantastic. But if we don't perform well in it as well, then does it really give much more confidence going into the next batch of fixtures, where they are coming thick and fast against teams that are going to be right up there? For me, it has to be a good performance and a win, and I think a good performance is the only way that we're going to remind ourselves internally just what we are capable of. So yeah, let's keep everything crossed for it. Let's see how the next couple of weeks unfold, and keep praying, basically.
I think another good thing to point out is the fact that we will have players back as well. We should have Carlton back. We should have Chong back. Even Hashi, to an extent, should be fit. So there's a bit more. We can have a right wing back. We can have left wing back. We can switch it around a little bit more if we want to. And that will help him massively. Baptiste as well should be a lot fitter by that point. So he will have more squad options, which I think is also a massive thing for him. Whether that makes a difference, I don't know, because neither Chong or Carlton have been in amazing form this season, but Derby Day can do a lot of weird things. And as Adam mentioned, a good performance would be nice. But for me personally, you get a win, that I'm happy. I'm delighted I'm over the moon.
Yeah, I think now it is all about winning that next game, no matter how you get a result. And if anything, it's not just the next game, it's probably the two after that as well, just getting results, no matter how you get those results. And I just wanted to touch on it because you mentioned already we've got Watford and then Sunderland, and they are the two games that the last time we were in the Championship. They were the best atmospheres at the Kenny in a long time. The Watford, obviously, being the derby, that was an insane atmosphere. And Sunderland was, one moment in particular was when Cody Dramé, who was pressed in the opposition half, and the roar that went up there was like we'd scored a goal. And those two games could really change that atmosphere. And somewhat, I don't know, after that we got Coventry away, and that's another side that, I mean, in that promotion season, Coventry were a pretty big story with us. And I think we'll leave it on that. But as always, we would love to hear your thoughts from everything we've discussed, especially the spine of the team. So if you want to have your say on the spine of the team, please let us know. But from all of us, thank you for listening.